My name is Ben Mangan. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Social Sector Leadership, also known as CSL. And I want to welcome you all here. Thank you for being here. We have a fantastic panel of really distinguished leaders in social impact. And it's really an honor to have you guys here. And Kim, our moderator, also a very distinguished leader in social impact, is going to introduce the panel fully. I'm going to introduce Kim in just a minute. But I just want to say a few words about the center before we get started. So we have this vision that millions of people's lives around the world will be measurably better as a result of the teaching and the experiences that we provide to the students and the people that we touch here at Haas and beyond. And we do this in a number of different ways. We do this through events like this. We do this through our programs like the Board Fellows Program and Social Sector Solutions, and also Philanthropy University, which some of you have heard of. It's an online learning initiative. And we also do it through our courses. So Social Sector Solutions, how many of you are first-year MBAs? Can you raise your hand? All right, so you start bidding next week, is that right? So I heartily encourage you to take Social Sector Solutions. It is a fantastic class offered in conjunction with McKinsey, and we work with real organizations that pay the teams to do engagements to solve really big problems. And so I encourage you to consider that class. I also encourage you to consider taking a class called Strategy and Leadership for Social Impact that I'm going to be co-teaching with Colin Boyle also in the spring, which is a new course designed as sort of a gateway to social impact courses here at Haas. And speaking of our faculty, Kim Wright-Violich, who is our moderator, serves on our faculty. She is also an advisory board member for CSL. We're very, very fortunate to have you in that role. And she's really an incredibly visionary, thoughtful, effective leader in social impact who's had a number of different roles. She was the president and CEO of Schwab Charitable, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, and sort of pioneered that whole space, which is now booming in many ways because of her leadership. And she currently serves as a managing partner and as co-founder of Tideline Advisors, which does tailored strategy for impact investing. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim, but I just want to ask you to give Kim and our panelists a very warm welcome to Haas.
Well, thank you, Ben. I'd love to take credit for the whole growth of the donor-advised fund industry, but I think that was a little bit hyperbolic. The one adjective that he did not use in reference to me was cold. Are you all cold? Yeah. Well, I don't think the HVAC system has caught up with the temperature change of the last 48 hours. So if you want to hug each other and cuddle up and put coats on, it's probably fine with all of us up here. And in fact, unfortunately, we're a little spread out, but we'll survive. So I have the privilege of introducing a fabulous panel tonight. And as you know, the purpose of this evening is to expose MBA students and others to the field of consulting in the social sector. And that includes consulting in impact investing, consulting in philanthropy, consulting in corporate social responsibility. And this is your opportunity to learn a little bit about that field and what the careers are like in that field. I'm going to start by introducing your panelists. You had an opportunity to get bios when you walked in. But I think it's important to at least do the short version of your bio because I want you to understand the caliber of the people that you have an opportunity to ask questions of. Then each of the panelists are going to take a few minutes and just explain their business, what their company and organization does. Maybe I'll also ask you to say whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit as well. And then we have a series of questions we'll go through, and if we get through all those, then I'll turn it over to you guys and you guys can ask them questions. Sound good? Okay. I still can't do anything about the temperature, but I'm glad you're smiling. I'll start. It is not in the order on the panel, but it's in the order on my piece of paper. So I'm going to start with Allison Caldwell. Allison is an associate director of advisory services at BSR. Allison oversees the design and execution of projects on human rights, community engagement and development, responsible labor, strategy integration, and gender across industries, primarily in the energy and extraction companies. She has conducted field work with communities and stakeholders in Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, North America. Her human rights project work with extractive industries includes implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the GPs, and the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights. And this next piece I can't wait to hear about. She also co-created a tool for companies to assess human rights risks and opportunities aligned with the GPs, and a tool to prioritize community investment opportunities aligned with both company strategies and community needs. Prior to joining BSR, Allison worked with bilateral and multilateral international development agencies, including the International Finance Corporation, World Bank, International Development Research Center, and NGOs affiliated with Organizations of American Studies. She is fluent in English and Spanish. She got her MA in Public Policy and Administration at Carleton, and a B in Communications? Bachelor's in Communications? Okay, thank you for getting me straight there. In the Global Development Studies at Queen's University. Please join me in welcoming Allison. It should be noted that on this panel there are two people who studied at Haas, too. And Jennifer is one of them. So Jennifer is the Chief Investment Officer at the Nonprofit Finance Fund, and my firm, Tideline, is currently doing some work with NFF. And Jennifer actually has been a guest lecturer at one of my classes here at Haas. Again, she's the Chief Investment Officer at Nonprofit Finance Fund, a national CDFI that provides loan and investment capital to the social sector for more than 30 years. Based in San Francisco, Jennifer has been instrumental in building NFF's impact investing portfolio in a number of key sector areas. She was responsible for asset origination, business development for NFF's lending practice, and NFF's market tax credit program, new markets tax credit program. In addition, she consults with foundation and institutional investors on program-related investing and impact investment strategies to achieve social impact while meeting each investor's risk and return parameters. Prior to joining NFF in 2009, Jennifer spent 15 years in the mainstream of financial services industry, working in business development, credit, and portfolio management positions at the Bank of America and at GE Capital. She began her career in finance as a security analyst at TIA at CREF, a nonprofit Fortune 100 financial services organization. Jennifer serves on the boards of Berkeley Food and Housing Project, Theater Bay Area. She previously co-chaired the Emergency Loan Fund for Northern California Grantmakers and was appointed to the Housing Advisory Committee and Loan Administration Board at the City of Berkeley. Jennifer received her MBA at Columbia, and she holds a BA in English and a BS in Business Administration at UC Berkeley at Haas. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
So the next person I'm going to introduce, and I have served together on a board several years ago, and she went to that lowly school of Harvard. Willa is a partner at Bridgespan, a group, a nonprofit advisory resource for mission-driven leaders that are focused on achieving breakthrough social impact. Willa advises organizations on developing their strategies and improving their operating models. Her engagement has included Reading Partners, the Rockefeller Foundation, Strive Together, the White House Council for Community Solutions. She has also authored numerous articles on youth employment, the social sector, multi-sector collaborations, and constituent engagement. Before Bridgespan, Willa served as CEO of Glide Foundation, a large multi-service organization. Prior to Glide, Willa was the executive director of the Tide Center, an organization that provides infrastructure services to the nonprofit groups. Willa's for-profit experience includes 7 years at Milepost Adventures, a venture capital firm she co-founded. Additionally, Willa was executive director of AirTouch Communication, a multi-billion-dollar wireless communication company where she helped the company achieve dramatic global expansion through mergers and joint ventures. Willa is a board member of College Futures Foundation. She was the former board chair of KQED, where we served together, and was vice chair of the board of trustees of Bryn Mawr, my grandmother's alma mater. And Willa has an MBA from Harvard Graduate School of Business, a JD from Yale Law School, and an AB from Bryn Mawr. Please join us in welcoming Willa. Last but not least, and if she looks really calm, it's because she just came back from a sabbatical, so you can pick on her and we'll get her back tense quickly. Laura Tilghman, last but not least. Laura is a senior consultant in FSG. I think you're all familiar with FSG if you know anything about the social sector. Laura is a senior consultant in the San Francisco office. She enjoys working with a broad range of clients across for-profit and nonprofit sectors. She is currently working in Fresno, California on a cross-sector collective impact initiative to improve maternal health. Prior to FSG, Laura worked for several social ventures focused on economic development and entrepreneurship. At Sustainable Harvest Coffee Importers, Laura played several different roles, including strategy, communications, and business development. She speaks Spanish and has worked throughout Latin America and lived in Mexico for several years. In her early career, Laura coordinated economic development programs at the Pan American Development Foundation in Washington, D.C. Laura has her MBA from where? Of course. And a BA from Brown. Welcome, Laura. Okay. So the first question we're going to ask them, and I'm just going to let one of you jump in. And if you don't jump in, then I'm going to call on you. Just to sound like class. See, they've got the name placards. I can't tell you when I teach, when somebody doesn't have their name placard, I purposely call on them. So, tell us about your favorite project case. And if the most inspiring and rewarding project is different from your favorite, tell us about both and why one may be inspiring but not necessarily your favorite to work on, and vice versa. Who's going to jump in? No, I don't want you to jump in. I messed up because I want to hear about your organizations. So will you save that? Okay. So do you want to jump in instead and tell us about Bridgespan? Okay. So we'll do that part first, and then now you know what the question's going to be.
So Bridgespan started about 15 years ago, so we're still a relatively young organization. We were spun out of Bain Consulting, and we still have somewhat of a relationship with them. We're a nonprofit ourselves, so we serve the nonprofit sector, both nonprofits, foundations, and high net worth individuals in terms of their philanthropy. And we have our own kind of social purpose, and what we're trying to do is really trying to address the issues of intergenerational poverty. And so much of our work focuses in that space. We do work in public health, also in education, as well as in children, youth, and families, which is the practice that I'm in. And we also do work in the global development area. We just opened our first international office in India just very recently, so we're very excited about that. And have just continued to be very excited about the work we're doing, both in serving clients, but also in the knowledge work that we do, which is very much a core part of how we perform our consulting. It's core to our work and what we want to do in terms of supporting the social sector beyond the people that we serve as clients. And then we also have a leadership practice where we actually do a number of engagements across the country where we are working to train the leaders in terms of strategic leadership and also supporting them with regards to projects so that we can, extend the consulting work we're doing.
Allison, tell us about BSR.
Sure. BSR is a member-based nonprofit.
Can you all hear?
Nonprofit consultancy. We're based in San Francisco. We have 8 offices globally in Europe and Asia. We're almost 25 years old, and our mission is to create a more just and sustainable world, and we do that through working with companies. So I'm a part of our advisory services team, which is our consulting team. We also have an in-house research team that takes, we conduct primary research and take also secondary research and convert it for a business management audience. We have an annual conference that was last week. Hopefully some of you were able to join us. It was in San Francisco this year. And we also do a lot of collaborative initiatives where we bring together companies across different issues or across different industries to focus on issues where they're all trying to make progress and change. So I help support the BSR's Human Rights Working Group that is helping companies implement the UN Guiding Principles on business and human rights.
Thank you, Allison. Jennifer.
Good evening, everyone. I work for the Nonprofit Finance Fund. And first I'm going to tell you about the fund part of the name because we often get questions about that. So the fund part of the Nonprofit Finance Fund is a loan fund, and that's where the organization sort of began over 30 years ago as a loan fund to nonprofit organizations who often struggle to access capital through the mainstream of financial services. So that's roughly half of our business at the Nonprofit Finance Fund. We have a loan fund, and we also are an allocatee, a recipient of New Markets tax credits from the Department of Treasury. And so we provide capital to nonprofit and social sector organizations for everything from working capital to facilities, and that's the financial services side of the fund. We also have an advisory services practice, which has been around for about 15 years. And we work primarily with foundations who will fund our work either with individual grantees or a cohort that may be part of an initiative that the foundation has created. And most of the consulting is around issues of financial sustainability. So we provide technical assistance, everything from sort of an entry-level engagement around nonprofit business model, and then program profitability or capitalization planning are some of the types of engagements that we're involved with. And increasingly we're involved now in work called Pay for Success or social impact bonds, which some of you may have heard of, and we're doing a lot of work in terms of helping public-private partnerships form around trying to test this model of social impact bonds or Pay for Success.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Good evening. FSG was founded about 15 years ago, and it started out doing primarily strategy in the philanthropy world, and since, in the last 15 years, has really grown in the breadth of its work. Today, it's a strategy and evaluation firm that works, it's a nonprofit, I should say, and we work across sectors now. So we have approach areas is really how we like to think of it, and broadly, they're sort of organized to some degree around sectors. So we have a shared value approach, for instance, which primarily works with our corporate clients. We have sort of a philanthropy approach area that, again, still is sort of very much working with foundations and other kinds of donors on their strategy. Anyway, so we do sort of work across a breadth of clients, and I think that at this point we're sort of growing and changing, and that's part of the exciting thing, I would say. But it's, as with many of the folks at the table, it's always interesting to sort of point in time describe the work, and I think it's sort of an evolution. There are 6 offices for FSG, so 4 in the United States, 1 in Europe, and 1 in Mumbai, India. And we do work across both the United States and also internationally.
Thank you, try the question again. And Willa, who's, Harvard, Yale, Bryn Mawr, is probably always well prepared, but now she's doubly prepared. Okay, Willa.
So I was going to just talk about an organization that's local that some of you may know called Family Independence Initiative. Does anyone here know that organization? So it's in Oakland and started by a man named Maurice Lim Miller. And Maurice ran an organization in San Francisco called the Asian Development Bank for many years that really focused on teaching youth about careers in terms of what they were doing with regards to construction and other fields that are related to that. But at one point in his life, he made the decision and realized that he didn't really feel that nonprofits were actually serving people that were poor, and that instead they were creating kind of a dependency cycle. So he made the decision to start an organization that actually does very little to support the clients that they work with. They don't provide advice. They don't provide counsel, and they don't provide information about what they would do if they choose to, but they basically create these family cohorts that come together that meet together to help each other figure out how to improve their lives. They each have developed goals. It might be, I want to get my child graduated from high school, I want to increase my income, I want to do X, and they really are there to network and support each other, and they encourage them to figure out what their own assets are. And the reason why this was one of the most interesting projects I worked on was that it's a whole different way of thinking about the social sector and what change requires, and also what low-income people are capable of doing. It really required a kind of mindset shift for us in working with this organization and describing, what it did to funders, because part of this goal was to create an opportunity to have growth capital for their work, which they were actually successful in doing after our business plan with them. So I enjoyed it because the people were fantastic, really great, vibrant group of people, small organization, but packs a powerful punch, very focused on advocacy, and so also in terms of changing mindsets broadly, and have had, I think, a quite significant impact in terms of just changing the conversation of what needs to happen for the working poor. And then also just an opportunity to kind of expand our portfolio of the kinds of organizations we work with and our approaches in thinking about what does social change really require? How much is organizational? How much needs to be through constituent engagement and through engaging people to find ways of changing their own lives? So that was what made that project very, very fascinating. And also it was great that it was local.
We'll get to travel and consultants in a minute. Okay, who wants to tackle that same question? Something that was inspiring and particularly rewarding, a project that you worked on. Okay, Allison?
I'll give an example. I do a lot of work in Latin America, and I had the opportunity to work with one company for 4 years, which for my firm is not common. We often have kind of 3 to 6 month engagements, but we had 4 phases of work with the same mining company located in a remote kind of rural area of Latin America. And the reason why it was my favorite and inspiring is I got, for me personally, professionally, you got to be a part of the whole process, but also seeing the impacts at the end of the 4 years was really meaningful. So when we got there, our role, we were tasked to speak with over 100 different local leaders, government, NGO, nonprofit, schools, clinics, NGO activists, environmental groups that oppose mining, everyone, and help the company understand what were the voices in the community where they were operating and how they're having a positive and negative impact and what they can do to reduce their negative impact and enhance the positive impact. But really seeing themselves as one player in an existing community versus, trying to avoid creating dependencies, essentially. And so we listened to all these people's voices and were able to create strategies for how to engage with them in an ongoing way so their voice could be heard throughout the development of the project. And as it heads to mine closure, when a lot of people were getting employment at the mine site, what were the opportunities for them after employment? And so in terms of impacts, we were able to hire 2 nationals. So instead of me flying in and flying out all the time, which I still did, I was able to hire 2 people from the country and work with them to learn from them and train them on techniques for participatory community development and engagement. And they stayed on the ground and continued the project. And then for the community members, one example of work we did is we funded female entrepreneurs. So we tried to give both training opportunities for people near the mine to get direct employment from the company or indirect through sourcing and supplying products to the company, and then also looking at diversifying their economy. They were located in a very energy mining intensive area. So what are other income generating sources for them? And so we had the chance at the end of the 4 years to go back and speak to some of the women who went through the training program and received small loans to start their business. And I got to have delicious lemon meringue pie because one of them was a baker. But she was talking about how, she was able to save money and was able to send her son, the first person ever in their family, to university with this money that she was able to save from expanding from just cooking in her one kitchen to expanding into the building next to her and buying, conventional size ovens to make her pastries. And then another woman was doing sewing type work and mending and was able to save money to provide her mom cancer treatment. So I think for us, these are small loans or small things that we're doing, but for these people, it really was a game changer for their lives. And then on the company side, I was sitting next to the GM near the end of the 4 years together, and we were facilitating a town hall meeting. And normally there's a translator, but the translator wasn't there, so I was kind of real-time translating. And I got tripped up on some of the numbers around production and I don't know what, even in English, some of the millions of whatever the metric is. And he said, "It's okay, Allison. what's really important now is understanding what the community is saying about the impact we're having and how we're being a responsible neighbor for them. So just, they track their production numbers by the day, by the week. It's one of the number one metrics. And for a senior leader in this company to say, I realize that the impact I have is beyond that, and that's really important to me. That, for me personally, I can leave these projects and know the people that are staying on the ground making these decisions are taking into account the full spectrum of impacts, not just the financial impacts. So that was really rewarding for me personally. And then I think the community has really appreciated having a company who actually took the time to listen, and they weren't just pushing information out, but we had developed kind of a two-way dialogue.
Terrific, thank you. The next question is to tell us about your worst client project or cause, and they can do this anonymously, and they need to share with us what made it painful or challenging. And to make it easier for them to jump in and do that, I'm going to share one with you. So the consulting firm that I started with two partners a little over a year ago, so it's really, really young, although we're growing very quickly. I had been an operator, a general manager. I'd run organizations, so I'd never been a consultant before. And I had two things happen on this project. I loved the project, absolutely loved it. But the board of directors had hired us, despite the fact that the CEO didn't want to hire us. And two, so that, whether it was going to be implemented at the end or not became really questionable, and the board of directors just came back to us, and they're having troubles getting it implemented by the management team that didn't really want to take any change in direction. And then the other thing that made that really challenging for me personally is the first time I had experienced coming up with strategy and solutions and not staying for the implementation. And I've adapted to that now, but my partners teased me about that enormously because I'd ask them, like a week later, what do you think's happening? Because I couldn't let go of the fact that you give them a plan and you set them up as best you can for implementation. You ask questions, you leave them with detailed strategy, and then you do walk away. And that was hard for me. So I just am trying to make it easier for you guys by throwing one of my bad ones out first. But who would like to talk about a challenging project?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about it in sort of general terms, but the thing in my experience so far with FSG that has made projects really difficult is, and this is a little bit what Kim was sharing to some extent, but when your clients' sort of expectations aren't either aligned internally in their organization across different folks who you're interacting with, or aren't actually aligned with your own expectations for the project. And there's lots of effort and process up front when you're developing a new project and working with a new client to try and make sure that doesn't happen, and to scope and to really sort of talk about what you're going to do and what you're going to deliver. So it's not for lack of lots of effort up front to try and avoid this problem, but it can happen. And I was doing some work for a foundation, and really the sort of team who was doing their grant making was hoping that we were going to come in and answer some really tough strategy questions and sort of show them a way forward. I think their executives were thinking we were going to do an evaluation project that just looked at sort of what they had done, and then they would take it from there in terms of where they would go sort of from there. And then the philanthropist who provided the funding for this foundation, 2/3 of the way into the project, we were able to finally have a meeting with this person who was just extremely busy, wasn't able to sort of meet with us before then, and he sort of said, "Well, I'm really sorry. I think you all have gotten the wrong remit," and sort of full stop, and we sort of were sitting there thinking, "Oh my gosh, like there's not communication happening even between the primary funder and their executives." So I think that more than anything, and there's lots of little ways that projects can be challenging, but I think that in my experience has been the thing that makes a project sort of just really, a bit impossible to succeed, and then it's very hard to know sort of you're pouring all this time and effort and you sort of think, oh gosh, I don't know that this is going to go anywhere.
Anybody else want to jump in? Yeah, Jennifer? Okay.
Because of the way that our work is funded, it's usually the case that a foundation will engage us to work with their grantees, and so that can set up a dynamic where the organization that we're working with feels like they have to do this or they will put their future funding at risk. Now, that's absolutely never been my experience, that a foundation, sort of engages us and with an agenda. In fact, often, as we sort of have our initial conversations with a client, what we'll tell them is that, that the foundation has engaged us to work with you. The results of this will be confidential. They often don't feel comfortable that is actually the case. But again, it's this dynamic of sort of the funder is paying us to do this, so we have to do it, as opposed to, we really want to engage with the consultants and kind of figure out ways to sort of address particular issues. And most of our clients are nonprofit organizations in the United States, so all of our work is here in the U.S. And the nonprofit business model is just an incredibly challenging one. So, organizations need to adapt. In order to grow, adapt, change with changing needs in the community or a changing funding environment. They need capital for that. They frequently don't have the balance sheet, and we're really trying to help them, sort of think about that path forward. Where they have this sort of the strategic plan that lays out the direction that's sort of, and that, where the 5 years out, here's the shining beacon on the hill. But oftentimes there's no sort of financial roadmap that goes with that. And so sometimes we get great engagement, and sometimes they're just checking boxes and doing what they think the funder wants them to do.
Allison or Willa, do you want to add anything?
My worst client experience was for a relatively small organization, and we negotiated over time, and it was very challenging to negotiate the project. I think one of the things I realized is sometimes if it's challenging to negotiate the project, it's going to be probably a challenging client relationship, which it was. I think it was a client where they were, changing their minds from time to time about what they wanted. They were, I would say, very unappreciative, although happy with the final project, but just, kind of denigrating of us as consultants, even though I think we were doing actually pretty good work and had an incredible team on this particular project. So it was just not the best experience at the end of the day. And then by the end of it, you really want to have, after having gone through that, to feel that it's really going to lead to something very special. Yeah. But I'm not sure that really happened. And so, I know that they have now, it's actually been it's been a couple of years since this project, and they've just now started doing work with the work that we did with them, which is kind of amazing. But that's just what happens. And we do, stay in touch with our clients, so we have been in touch with them just to find out how things are going, what's happening, et cetera. So it is gratifying to see them doing stuff with us now after it's been a couple of years.
So I think what you're hearing to some extent is one of the aspects of this work that's rewarding is feeling like you have an impact. Because it's probably not remuneration, is it? Anybody doing these jobs because they're going to get rich? No. Consultants who don't get extraordinarily well paid. You can make a decent living in the social sector as a consultant, but you do have to be motivated by some of the intangible rewards in addition to having a decent living, just because. And so that the sense of having an impact is huge. Obviously, one of the things that you also heard was how fun it is to learn about something new. That is one of the joys of consulting. I also want to go back to some of the challenges. I heard change management sort of coming up, and I think in the consulting business, the skill to manage change is emerging as being more important. Does anybody want to talk about, did you expect that? Is that true? Is that an accurate observation? And when you're recruiting new consultants, do you think about that? And
we obviously survey our clients to find out their perspective of our work when we complete projects, but also beyond that. So we stay in touch, continually for the next several years after we finish an engagement. But in terms of client feedback, when I first joined Bridgespan, which was about 5 years ago, our client feedback was consistently issues around implementation. We didn't feel like we had enough time on implementation, et cetera. And so it did lead us to completely change our approach to implementation on projects, so that we began the process of talking about implementation much earlier in the project, and also have created a whole body of work that we use to really speak to this issue in the social sector. And that's made a huge difference, and so we hear that feedback much less often. But the change management piece is huge. I mean, you can do a beautiful project, but at the end of the day, if the organization isn't ready to really move forward, then it doesn't matter that you did it. So part of it is really deciding, is this an engagement that the organization is actually ready to take on? And so we've had clients that have approached us about engagements, and we've said, for this to really work, this needs to be in place. And in some cases, it's meant we haven't done the engagement for several years. They've waited that long to do it because it took them the time to really get ready for it. And then we've come in and done the work. But at the end of the day, you really have to, first of all, know the client is ready. You have to also, through the engagement, really be assessing whether the client is capable of implementing and what the barriers are going to be, so you're addressing that all the way through the engagement, so that by the time they get done, they're really ready and prepared to take the next step.
Thank
so it's
you.
very, very important.
Allison, you dealt with some change management in your anecdote you shared with us.
And I'm not formally trained on change management, something I should. So this is just kind of on the job learning. There's 3, I guess, approaches I take. One is I've now built into my proposals an onboarding phase. So what I tell my teams is really you have to get inside the head of the people you're working with. So what drives them? What does their boss care about? Why do they need to implement this? If it fails, what will happen? If it succeeds, what will happen? So we spend a lot of time with them onboarding us as if we were a new employee. So how does your organization work? How do you make decisions? What are the top priorities right now? What keeps the CEO up at night? So we do that phase, which I hadn't done 7 years ago. I didn't think to do that. And now that's a big part of what I do, is just listen to them at the beginning and understand their systems and their drivers and their KPIs. The second one is ongoing capacity building, what a catchphrase. And that's really building in, we design teams that are the BSR team and the client or member company team. And so that is any decision we make, any report we prepare, workshop we deliver, we try to do it together. And so with the goal being, and that's what breaks my heart the most, I think, about being a consultant, is I'm not there to implement. So I see potentially all the human rights issues that are happening, and I don't know if they're being addressed. And so by doing this ongoing capacity building, hopefully at the end you can't say to me, I don't know what to do now, because I've walked beside you and learned from you, and you've learned from me the whole way. And then the last piece, and someone in the room has worked with me on a project, so she might be aware of this, I call it the role play. But before we submit any report to a company or a PowerPoint, I assign people on my team different tasks. So I'll say, you're the human rights organization that if this leaks and goes public, you're going to critique it. And you're the CEO, and you're super sensitive to any language that's critical. And so look at it with that lens. And then I have everyone have the role they play. And so we try to then look at the report at the end and say, okay, from the different people that might read this, how does it sound? How does it feel? Because the last thing you want is to have someone not implement your work because they're caught up on a phrase or sensitivity or something that we weren't aware of. So I try to put different hats on different people and look at it with that lens. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that's terrific. In fact, I should be taking notes, being such a young firm. Okay. Laura or Jennifer, do you want to add anything?
Well, one of the things that I love about the work that we do is that our initial exercise or initial engagement with a client is basically taking their information. We have sort of a model that we use both in the financial services side and the consulting side. We take 5 years of historical information. We sort of input it into a model, and for the financial services work, it spits out a bunch of spreadsheets, and we assess their capacity for debt and all these other things. And on the consulting side, the outputs look completely different. And so you get 5 years of historical financial information rendered in graphic form. And what I love about that is that every board meeting, there's a board packet that goes out to everybody on the board, and it has the balance sheet and the income statement, and they look at it. And because I was, trained and spent my early career in finance, I have now learned that numbers don't talk to everybody. So what's so interesting is that when you take this historical information, which all of the board members will have seen, but may not have really seen it in the same format, when you put it in a graphic format, it's like all of a sudden a light goes on where maybe there wasn't the same understanding before. And one of the things that I would note about working in the social sector, particularly with small to medium-sized nonprofits, is that generally it's primarily programmatic people, mission-focused people who don't think of themselves as having a high level of expertise in finance. And so this process of sort of showing them what they've already seen in graphic form it has a really empowering effect on the people around the table. And so we're usually presenting this information to the executive director, the board members, and maybe some of the other senior staff members. And so it often kind of changes the dynamic around some of these issues that they've been sort of wrestling with around financial sustainability. So I think that's one of the ways that we have of sort of getting people to think about things that they already know, but in a different way. And so it's a nice way to kind of start a relationship. It tends to kind of open up a dialogue, or sort of give a different slant to a conversation that has happened maybe over a period of years. It kind of opens it up and gives people a new perspective on it.
Laura, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think these are great examples of sort of different ways to do work or think about different ways of communicating. And I think the other thing I might just add is that I've also seen FSG trying to really experiment with how it structures and sort of structures projects on our own end. So from a timeline point of view, from a staffing point of view, I see us sometimes sort of verging a little closer to implementation for some clients and some kinds of projects. Sometimes having somebody stay on a little longer and really work through that change management process, even long after sort of the initial team that went in and sort of did a big strategy project has stepped aside, things like that. So I think there's also some pieces in sort of being a little bit flexible and sometimes trying to get a little bit creative in even though we are a consulting firm, how can we literally just sort of structure an engagement with a client to make it sort of enough of an extended process where it needs to be, or to make sure that we do enough of the capacity building with the right set of people who are then going to take the implementation forward. So that maybe is one other piece to sort of...
Okay, Laura, I'm going to start with the next one with you, which is, what are the best and worst aspects of being a consultant? Now, be honest, because they're trying to decide what they're going to do with their lives. It can involve airplanes. It can involve remuneration. It can involve...
Well, I should caveat this by saying that I've been sort of technically a consultant for a year and a half. So you've got sort of maybe more longevity on this side of the table, and they can speak to this. But I think in the time that I've been with FSG, I have found it's my prior work was in sort of different social enterprises and sort of within an organization as an implementer. And I found that one really wonderful thing about being on the consulting side is being able to sort of look across organizations in a very different way and see sort of patterns and trends and in some sense, sort of if depending on sort of where you're working, almost like the system or the ecosystem that's at work. And that, I think, is much harder to do when you are in the thick of sort of day-to-day implementation work. So that has been really a wonderful part of the work with FSG and something I feel like I've learned a ton in the last year and a half. I think that the sort of the challenges, there's many and they look different for different people, but I think the one for me has mostly just been trying to balance your work with your life because, as Kim mentioned, people do this work because they're excited and they're passionate and they're looking for impact, and there's always more that you can do. Just literally, there's always more. And so in some sense, I just think it's a challenge when you are traveling and you are sort of on site with a client. You can spend a lot of time in on the work, and I think that sort of achieving that balance while still sort of keeping yourself energetic and excited about the work and taking care of yourself is a challenge.
Other bests and worsts? Go ahead, Allison.
I think diversity, so I think you're kind of saying that as well, Laura, but diversity of issues, of industries, of geographies. I never thought I would be able to go to as many places as I have or work on as many different themes as I have, so that's been really rewarding. And as a continual learner, I think it fulfills that part of me. I wish I was still in school. I love being at school. I love being at Berkeley. So that has been amazing. And the other part is a positive and negative, but the fast-paced, so you're definitely not bored. I mean, it's a constant challenge. You're constantly solving different problems. Especially because we work on multiple projects at the same time. In a way, if one project's not going well, you still can find meaning and get rewarded out of the other projects you have. So that diversity of your portfolio, I think, is also important. And then for the challenges, definitely for me, the not being a part of implementation, seeing the impact firsthand is hard. And then also the balance. And I think that goes 2 points. One, you're on the road a lot, so it's a lot of time that you're not with your friends and family, which is both a it's an amazing opportunity, a privilege to be doing work in other areas, but I don't have an opportunity very often to work in my own community. And even at the job where I am now, I don't get to volunteer as much because you need to be able to commit to being there 1 day a week. And, I really can't commit to that. So I think that's been hard. And then also the long hours. So being in the field is amazing. You're close to impact. But when I'm working in areas that are, conflict zones and you have armed bodyguard or restricted freedom of movement, you will be working a 10-hour day, and then you have dinner with your team, and then if you're allowed out anywhere to get exercise, you're with your team. So you can be staying in the physically same house as your client or your company and be with them all the time. And so being able to both take care of yourself but also just have a little downtime can be hard. And I mean, I've become really good friends with some of the people that I work with for that, so that's great, but it is definitely a different lifestyle choice. Yeah.
Any other best and worst?
I think consulting is a great line of work if you're sort of a learner type, and it sounds like most of us up on this panel are learner types, and so I think it really feeds that part of me that I'm always sort of learning something new, and so I love that aspect of it. I would also say that we work in many different sector areas, each of which it requires a great deal of specific knowledge. And so sometimes it's difficult for me to sort of shift gears as quickly as I need to. So we might be working on something for a client that's in education, and then I have to sort of quickly shift over to a community health clinic engagement or to a human services client. And so there can, or a tax credits project. So there can be I can feel a little scrambled at times, having to sort of shift my thinking. And I would say the other challenge about the work that we do, because we are a nonprofit organization, is that we have our own capacity issues. So, sometimes, you feel spread a little bit thin.
Willa?
I think that with anything you choose to do, people make a huge difference because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And so I think being in a place where you really are in alignment with the culture and alignment with the values of the organization is hugely important. I was led to Bridgespan mainly because of that, really thinking about the leadership, how they think about things, and I had just tremendous respect for that, so that was a huge factor for me. And then, I think in terms of the opportunity, I think much has been said about what's great about consulting. The work is fascinating. I think we really look very deeply at the impact we're having, and so and we're focusing on that even more so now as we think about what are really scalable solutions to really the problems that exist today. How do we think differently about solving these problems? And so it's just a particularly exciting time, I think, in the social sector at this moment, and it's an exciting time to be in consulting. And I think we see ourselves very much kind of joined at the hip, even more so with our clients and with people in the field, trying to think about ways to structure different conversations outside of our consulting that could really fuel progress in the social sector. So I think it's a really fascinating time to be in this industry because of where it's heading. And then I'd say in terms of the worst things, I think travel can be really challenging. In the nonprofit space, we don't tend to have the luxury of, we don't tend to have the luxury of sitting with our clients for weeks on end. So I think that's actually a benefit of being in the nonprofit side. So I'm rarely out with one client for an extended period. But certainly if you happen to be placed on 2 travel cases, that can be challenging. I mean, I think we try to spend a lot of time thinking about the issue of what we call sustainability, which it's really up to our staffing managers to really think about what's the experience that people are having, and if it's something where they're continually in situations that are not sustainable, then we really do try to address it.
Okay, thank you. So I will ask this. We only have, I want to open it up in about 5 or 10 minutes to the broader audience. But if somebody asks you to finish this sentence, fill in the blank, with a short phrase, you should not be a consultant in my field if. Who wants to start? Should I start? Okay. I have more than one. I have 3. You should not be a consultant. Well, I won't give you all 3 because maybe they'll pick one. You should not be a consultant in my field if you want to get rich.
One is that so much of this work is done collaboratively, and that's not just, I don't just mean in teams, I literally mean sort of collaboratively creating ideas and end deliverables for a client. So I think there's sort of no shame if you're somebody who likes to sort of sit with something and really mull it over and kind of have a lot of ownership and authorship that's distinctly yours. It's probably not the right field for you. And I guess maybe the only other one I would say is the flip side of what we were talking about with being an opportunity to sort of always learn new things. If you're somebody who really craves stability with the relationships in terms of who you work with, in where you work, in the topic, if you sort of always want to feel like you're the expert and sort of then it would probably be challenging.
Other comments, thoughts?
I'll fill in the blank by saying you should not be a consultant in my field unless you have a healthy dose of humility. Because as much as we're trying to bring answers to our clients, we have a lot to learn from them.
Yep.
You should not be a consultant in my field unless you are adaptable and passionate.
In my field, unless unless you're a person that enjoys the opportunity to kind of work on a variety of different things, and you're not completely wedded to working in one particular area or subject matter.
Terrific. Thank you for that. What do you? We talked about change management, and so we've talked a little bit about the soft skills. What has surprised you the most that you found yourself doing, and skill that you wish you had developed before you sort of arrived and found yourself using it?
I would say that because my background was in finance and because my MBA was in finance, I was sort of surprised that it took me this long to sort of understand that in the social sector in particular, this may not be true in the corporate sector. It's really about storytelling. Finance is really about storytelling. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about the work that we do, is that we're sort of teaching nonprofit leaders to tell their programmatic story in financial terms and their financial story in programmatic terms. So it's not about the numbers, it's about the storytelling. And if you can do that, if you're a social sector leader who can do that, you'll be able to fundraise more effectively. You'll be able to deepen your relationships with community partners. That's so much of what it's about. And I really enjoy that part of it now.
Other surprises and skills you had to use?
I'm on PowerPoint than I would like. It's not my strength.
Look how far we've gotten into this before we got into the PowerPoint thing. PowerPoint production is this job.
Mm-hmm. That's not my strength, I wouldn't say. So I wish I'd done like a graphic design or some type of course that would enlighten me. And then also I think I never knew, maybe it's because I kind of came before email was such a big thing, but email triage, like when you wake up in the morning and because you're a global organization, you're already 100 emails behind. And that happens every morning. So I think developed a quick skill of knowing what you have to respond to and what not to, and letting go of my Canadian guilt of like everyone deserves a thank you and some form of response. I wanted to put
nice Canadians
in my out of office like, please call if it's urgent and don't hate me. But I think it's also like a favor to your colleagues of knowing, do I need to send an email or not? And so I've been trying to be really mindful about the email culture and letting us all do meaningful work and reducing unnecessary email.
Do you want to add anything, Will?
I've been surprised at just how much writing I do. So it actually, I think partly, yes, we do a lot of work in PowerPoint, but we're also increasingly doing more work where we're actually writing. And so I think we found that to be an increasingly important skill in the people that we hire, and recognizing some people really struggle with writing well, and just how important that skill is.
Yeah, and I do think consulting firms that that want to leverage what they've learned end up being thought leaders, and so therefore they do a lot more writing.
And also with our clients too. So we do it in both ways.
So why don't you tell us what would be the ideal career track to get in your current role? What would it look like? And then tell us what your career track really looked like. In other words, you're probably supposed to, reassure those of us that had a very serendipitous route. I hate to tell you, my first job out of undergraduate school was working with Union Carbide. So you never know where you're going to end up, right? So who wants to tell us about their career track, what they think the ideal career track would be versus the actual career track that you took? Willa, you've been pretty eclectic. I'm going to pick on you because you've been eclectic.
Well, we have a number of people that come to Bridgespan, and we now, as I said, we've been around for about 15 years, and so we now have a set of people who have grown up with the firm literally, and some who've come up from being an AC all the way through to getting to be partner, and others certainly that start as consultants after they've come out of business school, et cetera. And so I think it's actually a great place to work from that standpoint. I think with how we're doing our work, as I mentioned, I just think we're just in such an exciting moment, and so both in terms of getting that consulting skill set early. I think increasingly you were able to, because we have the leadership work and we have a variety of things that you can do, you can actually build a different set of skills within Bridgespan that move you up from consultant up to partner. And so I think actually it's a great career to do that. And I think increasingly people are finding their place in really interesting ways that come with a variety of different experiences and interests, and we're finding ways for people to enjoy that within our context. So I think that's great. In terms of my career, it has been zigzaggy. I started out in the corporate world, and I'm glad that I had a chance to do that, because it was I've worked with great people. So I guess my focus has always been on working with great people and great organizations, and so that's been a consistent thing throughout my career, finding the great people that I believe I'm going to learn the most from and they're most invested in my development, and then second of all, finding organizations that are truly great and have a really clear mission, a really clear focus, and are very driven to be ambitious in the work that they're doing. So I think those are the two things that I've tried to do consistently. And so my career has zigzagged from corporate and then to starting my own firm and then into the nonprofit sector, because as I really reflected on the work I'd been doing, I really wanted every day to count towards making society better. And so that could have either been in a social enterprise or it could have been in the nonprofit space, but I just wanted that to be how I was spending my time. And so since I made that decision, I've been led a couple of organizations and then have been in consulting for about 5 years.
Terrific. And I want to really echo the comment about people. When I talk to my own children who are just finished undergraduate, I say who you work with is more important than what you do. And it took me a long time to make that decision. But I think, and Willa added great organization, because obviously that's important. And investing in your development and growth is important. But who you work with, it's amazing how important that is. You know how when you were looking at undergrads, you walked on campuses and said, this is my home or this isn't my home, and you could just sort of feel it walking on campus? It ought to be sort of similar when you're looking for jobs. Anybody? Who else wants to go next?
an ideal career path for where I am now would be more in-company experience, since we work with companies and change management is so important. So I was very briefly in a couple of companies. I didn't last too long in those roles for my choice to leave for different opportunities. But so that would be one. And then also having the mix of the headquarter, corporate level experience, and then the field site, factory farm, whatever it is, but the implementation level, and environment and social experience. So understanding the overlap between those two. My career path, I was also all over the place. I have mostly social experience, so I'm trying to kind of get more experience around ecosystems and water and climate change to complement that. And I work for NGOs in North America, in Chile, the UN, the World Bank, a couple companies, the Canadian government, definitely all over. And it was kind of following opportunity that came up. So if someone gave me a great opportunity, whether it was the issue I wanted to work on, the country I wanted to work in, or the people I wanted to work with, and I think that the two common threads for me were working with people I respect, who I could learn from, and the mission of the organization, or the team that I was on. So I wanted to go to work feeling like I was using my skills and I was making a contribution. And so that kind of led me on this path. And it was 5 years of an independent consultant. I worked for all these different short-term contracts, and then 7 years now at BSR.
So I would say that I had a very non-linear path, to my current position. And also in the 6 years that I've been with the Nonprofit Finance Fund, the work that I've done has shifted. So we're sort of at the point now where we're starting to create sort of a career path within the organization where we are hiring analysts and associates right out of school, and there's sort of a career progression for them to follow. But the organization has also had to adapt and change and grow in different areas, so we frequently have to sort of hire and add different skills to that. And so I work with amazing people. Some of them have backgrounds in the arts. Some of them have background in, organizations with, urban farming. Some of them are refugee bankers, from the corporate banking world. So there's really a wide variety of experiences among my colleagues, and I think that's one of the things that makes it a great place to work, is that there are people down the hall who have done things completely different than what your experience has been. So I always feel like I'm learning a lot, not only from my colleagues but from my clients. I had good quantitative skills coming in because I worked in banking and I worked as a securities analyst. I took time off to stay home with my kids, and during those years I was a volunteer in the community, and I think that's sort of part of what led me to where I am now. So that's my story.
Laura, do you have anything you want to add?
I guess just really to echo that a little bit of what Allison said, that I think choosing your career path, it doesn't have to be coherent in terms of exactly what you do or where you work, but choosing a career path that helps you get multiple different perspectives on sort of an issue that you care about or a field that you care about. So a little bit to your point about sort of headquarters and field staff, or, I think that has been one of the things that I have found most valuable, and also that I most appreciate in my colleagues when I am working with people who have both been on the side of somebody trying to really create a very specific social change in their community or through a certain organization, but who can also then sort of turn around and know what it is like to be somebody at a corporate headquarters or at a foundation, program officer or a donor. So I think it matters less specifically what you do to get those different perspectives, but being able to take multiple perspectives is critical.
Okay, I want to, because it's cold and I think you guys need to move, I think we'll start turning the questions over to you guys. We have about 20 more minutes. And while you're walking up to the mic, if you have a question, I'll share with you what my perspective was on career development, which was my career was never linear. But I did make a decision after I had children that I wanted to be at the interface between the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector. And the reason I chose that interface was because I wanted the sort of sense of urgency and the pressure that markets put on for-profits. And I wanted to feel like if I was going to be away from my children, that my work was having an impact. And so it was really my children that shifted my career choice. When I teach to the undergraduates at Berkeley, I often suggest that they get some for-profit experience before they go to the social sector, although I don't think that's as necessary. Nora Silver here at CISL is doing some research about how much people are moving across sectors in their career now, and it's happening a lot more than it used to, where people will work for the government and then they'll move to the private sector and then they'll go to the social sector. 15, 20 years ago, I would have considered it risky because I would have thought if you went into the social sector, it would be harder to move back. It's still a little bit true, but not as true if you're doing a pretty demanding job in the social sector. Okay, our first question.
Hi, thank you. So this may be getting ahead of myself, but I'm wondering, as a consultant in a social impact consulting firm, as you advance in your career from being an individual contributor to a manager or partner, how you still stay connected to the mission and the work when you're not really doing as much of the traveling or being on the ground with the clients.
We are very closely involved with our clients, so I'm right there with my team. So I don't find that there's a gap at all. I pretty much go to all of our meetings and meet very closely with our clients. I'm involved in a lot of calls, and so I'm very much a hands-on partner, and I enjoy very much the work with the managers and the team. So I stay very actively engaged. So I'm not removed at all.
My experience is similar, but I think it's intentional. So I make sure that despite my additional responsibilities for strategy or team management or business development, that I still have a mix of projects that I have a hands-on role where I still am going to the client side or the product side of the community. I think it does. There are times when you will just play, for me, you'll play a smaller role, and that's hard to not be a part of the day-to-day and then to jump in. But I think I have to look at it as the impact I can have is greater supporting my team and having them do some of the good work, so finding that balance. But I definitely am intentional about making sure at least I have one project that I'm connected to the impact that we're having.
Similarly, I would say that I love the client engagement. That's kind of where where I get my energy, and so I try to find ways to stay engaged with clients. And also because I work primarily on the financial services side of the organization, I sort of insert myself into various consulting assignments that are interesting to me, or where I see a potential convergence between the work of our two different groups. And I think that you have to be much more intentional about how you manage your career now than you did 20 years ago when I was fresh out of school, because the notion of lifetime employment is long gone, and you have to think in terms of, where am I going to, where are the learning opportunities the best for me? Who are the people in this organization that I want to work with? And so I think it really is incumbent upon each person to sort of take a more active role in managing their their assignments.
I guess only I would add that I think that it's not that you become less engaged with the client or less engaged with the end impact as you sort of move up in your career, but it's as you become a team leader or things like that, you are sort of just in a different role where you're asking a different set of questions, and you may not be the one generating sort of the data or the initial insights or things like that, but you're my experience, and I think then with others who are senior to me, is that they're very engaged, and it's in the process of asking some of those questions and being able to sort of ask your team to sort of look at certain things that becomes sort of an equal, if different, contribution to sort of the end impact.
I'm going to try and call on one or two to respond to each question to make sure we get through all the questions. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, y'all, for a great panel. It's been super wonderful to listen to. And we've talked a lot about tonight the ideas of impact and sustainability and development. And obviously, these are really complex terms, and there's a bunch of different stakeholders in the public sphere, corporations, activists, academics. There's like multiple departments on campus dedicated to unpacking these terms. And obviously, at the end of the day, I imagine your firms get to decide what those mean to you to an extent, but also you have to balance keeping integrity with the ways that you're defining what makes the world a better place with the interests of the corporations you're working with different stakeholders that you work with. So I'm wondering how, at the end of the day, you reconcile all those interests and still be able to go to bed at night. Thanks.
I'm gonna tackle that before and give them a second to figure out who's going to answer that. I was on an interview today with a client that is an environmental organization, and they had to go to the government and try and convince them that there was something called beneficial use. In other words, in the area of the environment, when you have land that you segregate for protection, you can either have it completely protected, like public parks, state parks, national parks, or you can work with people that are farmers and ranchers and try and get them to ranch and farm in a way that has less impact. We can't eliminate all agriculture in the U.S. We have to eat. So, but there was an anathema as people transitioned from this binary view of it either was protected land or it was exploited land, and they didn't understand that there was this blended model that you could go about the utilization of land in a way that was less exploitive. And that to me doesn't feel like a compromise of my soul or the organization's soul. That actually feels very doable. So that's just an experience that I had today as an example. Let's see, Allison, because you're dealing with extraction companies in foreign countries, why don't you answer
Good question. Great question. For BSR, we have a theory of change, hopefully on our website. I don't have it memorized. The parts of it that I kind of cling to are we do work with business, so that's our starting point. So I love the organizations that put out the human rights reports and the environmental reports, and that's awesome. It's an important contribution and helps us actually do our work. But our theory of change is that we work with companies. So that's part of it. So that's a choice we make, including extractives companies. For me personally, it really comes down to trying, and we have the option, we can opt out of a project. So if we say it's inconsistent with, and there's a couple that if it's operating in an area that I think is for biodiversity or indigenous rights, whatever it is, I don't want to touch it. I can say, I really don't want to be on that project. But generally for me, it's about working with the companies who are open to listening to what we call rights holders, so the people whose rights are impacted by the project. So if they're coming from a place of they will let me go out and speak to them and listen to them and bring that input in, I think there's in the toughest projects is probably where we can play the greatest role, right? Those are also the hardest projects. Non-extractives project I was on, it was an agriculture project working with illegal migrant farmers in the Caribbean, and it was the toughest project I've ever been on because I saw the worst conditions and it was very slow to make change, and so that was hard for me. And so I then built in, hey, if I'm on a project where I think the company isn't going on a path to make meaningful change, that's my time is my contribution to this world. So I think it's fair to say we're not on this path together anymore. I haven't had to do that, but I think that's now something we're trying to bring into the considerations. If we can't have the impact we want, what should we do? I don't know if that answers. I'm happy to talk after. There's a lot of nuance. I'd be happy to stay. Yeah.
Get through the questions. Next question.
Thank you. Thanks for a wonderful panel. Jennifer, you made a statement which intrigued me. You said that the nonprofit business model is a challenging one. And when I think of a business model, I think of, how is it that a business generates revenue? And in the nonprofit world, it's always very difficult to figure out, what we're doing. What I'm curious about is what are the elements, or what is the essence of a really good business model for a nonprofit? Do you have any insights in that, and how do you go about measuring? I sit on several boards, and it seems like all of our business models are a mess. So I'm kind of looking for some suggestions here.
Well, I'm going to try to answer that briefly. I would say that generally, in terms of looking at the nonprofit business model, we're typically looking for things like what is the reliably recurring revenue of this organization. There are a lot of organizations that have historically relied on government funding only. We see sort of a wholesale change in the sector where it may have been the case 10 or 20 years ago that your government contracts would have covered the full cost of your programs. That is no longer the case. So there are a lot of organizations that need to sort of rethink their business model and build a fundraising capacity where they haven't had one in the past. Or there are organizations that don't segregate operating from non-operating revenues. When those two things are conflated, usually something like a capital campaign or a program that they've had because they had funding for a couple of years, they tend not to sort of, they may not look at it in terms of we have some revenue that's not going to be recurring, and we need to think about how we sort of manage based on the operating and recurring revenue only. So, and it's not easy.
Okay. We have 4 more questions and about 6 minutes to do it. So we're going to have to move through these quickly. Okay.
Thank you very much. Could you share with us a little bit of how the future of this kind of consulting looks like in 10 or 20 years, perhaps 1 or 2 insights of how the future looks like?
Willa, you've talked a little bit about your optimism about the space. Why don't you tackle this one?
I'd say just a few things, and I don't know what's happening 10 or 20 years from now, but certainly as I see it from today, we have, I think, a growing sophistication in our sector, and so we're at a point where there are a lot of the things that have shifted around people understanding that they do need a business model, understanding that they do need to have strong leadership. Some of those basics we have covered. And so I guess as I look out, I think that we will continue to, see this greater integration of our sectors, this notion of government and business and nonprofit, seeing those things overlap to a much greater extent, some of the work that Kim is doing and others have done in this arena. We've seen now also we worked also on developing the recommendations for the National Advisory Board on impact investing. And so we've already seen, based upon those recommendations that were done last year, that progress has already been made in shifting guidance around what can be done with pension funds, what can be done with PRIs for foundations, et cetera, which is fantastic. So I think that realm is going to be something that will develop and really be very significant in the future, more meeting its promise. I think now we see the promise, but we're still a long way from getting there. And then I think that as well, we will be in a situation where I think our organizations will be stronger, where we'll have the opportunity to actually, I think people are recognizing the need to develop career paths for people in the nonprofit sector, the need for training, the need for thinking about the issues of next generation leadership within the sector. So I think we're in a space where we're just going to get much better at what we do, and I think much sharper around how we achieve impact in the work that we do. So when I think about a business model, the first thing is it really needs to be focused on, is it achieving the impact in the ways that you describe, and is your model aligned to that? And I think we're getting sharper about that. And I think investors will get sharper in thinking about how they're focusing their funds. When I say investors, I mean funders, and also high net worth individuals, about how they're spending the money.
Thank you. Next question.
Thanks. Hi, I currently work in a strategy consulting practice for-profit space, looking to make a way into the social impact consulting. So with that being said, I just wanted to kind of ask, what would be some key differences between consulting nonprofit versus for-profit in terms of types of engagements, as well as how the engagements are managed and executed? Thank you.
Let me think. Maybe, Jennifer, you want to try it and tackle that? I mean...
Sure. There is sort of a range of engagements that the Nonprofit Finance Fund is involved in, and so some of them are very sort of tools based. So it can be something as straightforward as sort of teaching an organization how to incorporate the practice of cash flow forecasting, which is not something that that regularly occurs in a lot of nonprofit organizations, often because they don't have the capacity to do the work. And then, a completely different type of engagement would really be around sort of visioning and planning for growth or change that an organization wants to undertake. So often organizations in the social sector follow the funding, so they get a grant to start a new program, and it may be a matching grant. We might work with an organization like that to sort of develop a better understanding of what it would really cost them to execute on that grant. Often the cost of delivering on that program is not really covered by the funding that's available, and I think a lot of social sector organizations are accustomed to sort of taking what they can get instead of asking for what they really need. So that's a lot of the work that we do, is sort of helping organizations understand what is full cost. So that's not all that different from the work that you may be doing in the for-profit strategy consulting sector.
Can I add one?
Sure, please do, Laura.
I think also from my experience in social sector consulting, there's projects that I do that feel like they are strategy projects, but they're actually very much facilitation of sort of a community process. And I imagine that looks very different than what for-profit consulting would be like in terms of the sort of how a project is managed and the structure of sort of a team. I've been working for 8 months in the Central Valley of California just to bring different people together to address maternal health. And we are literally helping them set up a community initiative. It's not really important what the data says and what I think they should do. It's very much facilitating sort of them to come to their own decision. So that would be an example of something that I think looks very different than sort of for-profit management consulting.
Although I would argue, now in my case, we're in the impact investing space, which is closer to for-profit than pure philanthropic strategy. I would argue that they're getting closer and closer, sort of what Willa was talking about. The low-hanging fruit of best business practices has sort of been adopted by most well-run organizations at this point. So there is a blending that's sort of occurring. And in the corporate side, let's face it, your generation has said, if I can't have purpose in my work, I'm not that interested in it, whether you're working for a for-profit or nonprofit. So there's this blending that's occurring. Last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hi. I would like to know, how do you measure social impact, and if your organization develop some metrics, or if you monitor the project in the long term?
Oh, just a small question.
Yeah.
How do you measure social impact? We could spend 90 minutes on that question alone. Are you asking the question about how the consulting firms measure it, or how they're doing it for their clients?
No, the consulting.
Firms themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just see a show of hands of whether you measure it yourself as a firm.
Yeah.
Yes, your own impact. Okay, so Allison, your hand went up, so you get to answer the question.
We have organizational-wide indicators that include financial, people, and the impact that we're having. So that's one way. And then we've built it into different systems. So every project that we do, we have a project review that looks at different types of impact. So scale, actual impact, consequence, contribution. So what was our role versus the greater, role. And then also the outputs, which are the deliverables, but then the outcomes. So as a result of producing those deliverables, what happened? And then often it's what do we hope the impact is? That's the hardest one, because really you need to go back 2 or 3 years later. But so we have, in our proposals, we build in language around outcomes and impacts. So we talk with the member company and we design it into the design of the project. At the end, we measure that for each project, and then that goes up into a macro level at the end of each year. They review all the projects and try to talk about impact. So that's on the project side. And then on the communications, part of being a nonprofit is we put out publications, thought leadership on sustainability, on climate change, on human rights. And they have different indicators, I think, on the social media side of how many people have read it. And so there's kind of, for each part of our business, I guess, or business unit, we have a different perspective or KPIs. I'm happy to talk a bit more.
That is, we could really seriously spend, a day on that topic. So I'm going to have to cut it off, and you can ask the panelists if they're willing to stay for a few minutes after to answer questions individually about that. I will note that that is probably the driving thing in the impact investing space, is how are you measuring impact with financial advice. I was going to ask them for trends in the industry, but we're out of time, so I'm just going to say that in my experience, the industry is growing. The social sector consulting business is growing. Most of these firms are adding new people. I know I talked to Mark a couple of years ago, and he said, I'm hiring 65 people at FSG this week. And so I know that they're growing rather quickly. And I do think that there is, when I took a survey of students in my business school class last year, I asked them if they thought that what the primary purpose of business was, and having an impact trumped profit. So you're going to change how we look at this whole space. You're shaping it more than any of us are shaping it. So thank you very much for being here tonight, and thank you for staying through the cold.